you very much for being here, and I welcome you all near and also on live stream to this celebration of the wisdom, works, and spirit of Robert Thurman. My name is Sam Truitt, and I'm here with my colleague Michael Raphael of the Woodstock Center for Awakening, which is dedicated to awakening in all of its dimensions and all of its possibilities, and also to the proposition what does that say? We are not what we think. This is for Pete Kagan. Thank you so much for having us here. Michael will give some thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael Raphael from the Woodstock Center for Awakening, which also runs the festival. I just want to say that I feel very close to Bob, and I have something that I hold very, he just made a comment about emptiness and openness that really changed meditation for me, so I thank Bob for that. I just wanted to thank all those people who've been really helpful to this festival, and I have the Kelly Baker Memorial Fund, Mike Hassan and Bonnie Hassan, who've been helping us to do this festival, and Kathy Hertz, which supported today. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you, KD and Nina, for making great music yesterday.
And thank you also to Nena Thurman and to all the Thurmans for letting us have this celebration. And we had something for you, Nena. Danielle. So, getting out of the way of the universe, I'd like to introduce Michael Burbank. Michael Burbank is a longtime colleague of Robert Thurman's and his work. He was a student of Robert's at Columbia and sort of fell into his train and helped set up Tibet House, helped set up MEDMA, which he was director of for some time. He's on the board of that, the directors. And also lettered and co-authored Man of Peace, beautiful illustrated book of the Dalai Lama's life, and particularly with the assertion of Robert's interaction with that, which I read to my daughter Indiana when she was little, and she loved it, and it carved a path for her ahead. So let us all welcome Michael Burbank. Thank you so much, Michael, for putting this together.
It's a comic book, so that's great for kids. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Bob couldn't make it today in person, so I agreed to help convey his wisdom, works, and spirit as a backup plan with the speakers that we invited to participate today. So, Bob Thurman's impact on the countless people he touched throughout his life was enormous. In 1964, he made history as the first Westerner to become a Tibetan monk, while also becoming one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's closest friends and advisors. He studied intensively with the Dalai Lama's own preeminent teachers and quickly commanded a deep understanding of the Dharma. But on returning to America, he found no cultural support to sustain his mendicancy. Then, when he heard that Tim Leary and Richard Alpert were adapting the Tibetan Book of the Dead for their upcoming psychedelic trip manual, he went to Millbrook to try to ensure quality control. Then, there, he met the woman who would become his better 15/16, as he would say, Nena von Schlebrugge, who was then briefly married to Tim. He fell in love, gave up his monk vows for marriage vows, No? Okay. He did before then. Oh, it's not Nana's fault. In other words, okay. Pardon me. Sorry, Nana. But at Nana's and Geshe Wangyal's urging, he pursued the nearest modality to Buddhist monkhood in America, which is an academic career. After obtaining 3 degrees at Harvard, he taught at Amherst and then Columbia from 1973 to 2019, and continued teaching widely until his death. He never mentioned it, but his teaching career spanned 52 years, which is 7 years more than the Buddha himself. But who's counting? A precocious linguist, Bob learned Tibetan in 10 weeks and began translating Tibetan and Sanskrit Buddhist texts with preternatural skill. The Dalai Lama tasked him early on with translating the entire Tengyur, some 4,000 commentaries and treatises on the Buddha's teachings compiled over many centuries, a task so Herculean it was predicted to take him 3 lifetimes to do it. To tackle this assignment, Bob devised his own translation system, dramatically improving on those already in existence, and taught it to students and colleagues so they could work coherently through the entire collection. He translated many texts himself, including his best-selling Tibetan Book of the Dead, and quietly ghost-wrote large portions of many more texts than he took credit for. Bob also helped bring Tibetan art into Western consciousness and prestigious collections, collaborating with the art historian Marilyn Rhee on publications that are widely regarded as foundational in establishing Tibetan art as a serious field of art history rather than merely an appendage of religious studies. He was also a tireless activist for the Tibetan people, co-founding the Tibetan Cultural Embassy Tibet House, US, in 1987, helping establish and represent the Dalai Lama as a major presence in America, and spearheading the global Year of Tibet campaign in 1991, which helped make Tibet a household name. He also served as a bridge between Tibet and Hollywood. Did you know that he introduced George Lucas to the Lama that Yoda was based on? And that the language of the Ewoks is partially based on Tibetan? Well, now you do. Beyond advocating for Tibetans to Congress, foreign governments, and other influential parties, he also personally helped individual Tibetans navigate immigration. But his activism extended far beyond Tibetans and their existential situation to the entire human race and our collective struggle against oppression and exploitation, offering a realistic and hopeful alternative to the growing nihilism and hopelessness bred by materialism and militarism. Few of his Dharma talks failed to include an unsparing look at the spiritual bankruptcy that our modern Western so-called developed culture exhibits in its barbaric disregard for most of life on Earth. All of these accomplishments and so much more are what Bob was known for publicly. But it is as a friend, colleague, family man, employer, and close spiritual ally that so many of us came to know him as a transformational force in our lives. When I first encountered Bob in college, he lit my mind on fire. I had finally found someone who seemed to perfectly understand reality, who spoke truth to power, and earnestly inspired his students to be the very best people we could be. That he was absolutely hilarious and a veteran psychonaut from the 60s only added to the certainty I'd found my ideal teacher. Shortly after graduation, Bob recruited me to help him get the Menla retreat started with Nena for Tibet House at the top of Panther Kill Road in Phoenicia. He very quickly became like a second father to me. Despite my immaturity and obvious flaws, he always believed in me, encouraged me, and loved me unconditionally. And I quickly came to realize he was like this with just about everyone. His command of ancient wisdom, his optimism for the future, and his abundant joy were contagious. He was a genius who could do math in his head, understood 10 languages and most philosophies, and kept up as easily with history and current events as he did with the personal lives of the many people he befriended. His memory was prodigious, except, of course, when it came to passports and cell phones, personal appointments, and other mundane necessities. It is well known that work was Bob's favorite state of being. One day we were driving across Menla and Bob spotted a group of deer quietly minding their own business, eating grass in a field. He turned to me and exclaimed in all seriousness, "We should harness those deer and put them to work." He was Mr. DIY himself and had endless ideas on how to avoid hiring expensive professionals. For example, one day he brought in a couple of sledgehammers and proclaimed that we were going to build a road Mongolian style. I learned, to my great distress, this would not involve any actual Mongolians, but instead would involve me smashing large stones repeatedly for hours over many weeks. Gotta hand it to him, though, it worked. Another time, Bob advised me, in order to keep mice out of my cabin, not to set traps or bait like a normal person, but instead, whenever I ate magic mushrooms, to pee around the perimeter of the building, and that was certain to keep the mice out and wouldn't kill them. Bob could also be just a wee bit reckless. Thanks to his heroic sense of invincibility and vigilant guardian angels, he narrowly avoided certain catastrophe many times. I recall during Hurricane Irene, when 50 guests were stranded at Menla for 2 days at the end of a retreat, a huge tree fell on the main power lines and the campus went dark. With 70-mile-an-hour winds blowing trees sideways, torrential rains flooding the roads and the dam, and me screaming in vain for him not to do it, in my best attempt to channel Nena, Bob revved up a small chainsaw he'd found in the shop, and I watched with terror as he ignored or simply didn't notice a live high-voltage wire swaying just a few inches from his head while he skillfully cut the tree apart. With only one eye, no depth perception, and blinding rains, doing this without injury was a remarkable feat. Not to mention he was 70 years old at the time. He not only saved the day that day, but of course felt further justified in his own impervious self-confidence. Bob provided ample evidence that profound spiritual and intellectual wisdom are not at all synonymous with basic common sense. For example, his difficulty hearing well clearly impeded his life, not to mention making things more difficult for those of us around him. He never seemed to benefit much from conventional hearing aids, so finally, someone offered to buy him a very expensive state-of-the-art device, which would definitely work. But to our amazement, he declined, regardless how many people prevailed upon him. So after catching wind of this myself and thinking to try a different tactic, I purchased an antique ear horn and presented it to him in front of a large group of friends and family for his birthday, explaining that this was our collective last resort. He was astonished and delighted to learn that it worked, and very well at that. Still, as far as I know, he never used it even once after that day. Oh well. Over the years, many brilliant people sought Bob for his unique perspectives, which he offered freely without asking for credit. I rarely heard him turn down requests from students for a personal Q&A after class. And when he did, it was inevitably because he was already late for another commitment. A consummate double booker, he had a well-documented disregard for the constraints of normal space-time. Many times I was struck with fear when he would nonchalantly ask me to remind him exactly what subject he was supposed to talk about just before the program was about to start, only to watch in awe as he delivered masterful teachings every single time. I came to see him like a seasoned jazz musician, at ease in any setting, riffing freely and joyfully through a lifetime of artfully embodied wisdom. I told Bob a few times that one of my goals for my own old age is to find and recognize his reincarnation and get him reestablished at Tibet House so he can get back to work as soon as possible. He laughed, but he probably would love nothing more. That said, he worked for all of us and so many others with such passion over many decades without ever taking much of a break for himself. Now, he finally has a break, and I feel compelled to let him have it in peace by not clinging to him much as I would like to, content to let him live on in his works, in his family, and through all of us as we seek to embody the teachings he so illustriously brought to life. He was our fearless leader, our remarkable friend, a beacon in the darkness, and so damned fun to be around. We wish you total liberation, Bob, or at the very least, a most excellent womb shot for your next life. Until we meet again. So that's my attempt at a broad overview. And now we're going to hear from various friends and colleagues and students. And then afterwards, we'll have a microphone. We do have a microphone on the stand over there. If anyone in the audience would like to share comments or memories, keeping it to 3 minutes or less, like a good recovery meeting, or ask questions from us about Tenzing, if you'd like, Tenzing Bob Thurman. So the first speaker is Ira Schepetin, who is a Vedanta scholar and has been debating Bob since 1991? No, 1991, right? And they debated in this very room last year, and they were supposed to speak together this year, so this is what we're doing instead.
Well, I'm privileged to have the opportunity to participate in an event like this. I feel maybe not qualified to be doing this, but I'll just briefly share my experience with Bob Thurman, Professor Bob Thurman, Tenzin Bob Thurman. It was in 1992 that I had a close friend by the name of Lex Hickson, and he was staying at my house in Woodstock, and he said, "Come, I want you to meet my friend and colleague and mentor, Bob Thurman. Let's go to his house." So we went to the house and we sat down, and Lex, for those who may not know about him or of him, was kind of an eclectic thinker. He was a Buddhist, he was a Sufi, he was a Christian, he was a Vedantin. And so the Vedantin part of him was that he would talk about a supreme being or a God, and as soon as that came up, Bob would immediately jump on him and say, "Oh, Big Daddy in the sky? Big Daddy in the sky?" I would sit there quietly and not know what to make of this friendship, because obviously they were very close. Bob actually went to Lex's funeral at St. John Cathedral and gave a 5-page soliloquy about Lex Hickson. He was very close. So Lex came up with the idea that we should open up a center here in Woodstock on Tinker Street, and it was to be called the Vedantic Light. And it would be, Lex would give talks on Ramakrishna, I would give some talks on some subjects of Vedanta, and Bob, who had just finished one of his wonderful works called the Vimalakirti Sutras, every Sunday he graciously came, and of course he was the star, and the whole place filled up outside onto the lawn, and for almost 2 years Bob came and gave talks on the Vimalakirti Sutras. During that period, I was so impressed by this teacher that I began reading his other books, and I came across his book, which I think is his masterpiece, called The Central Philosophy of Tibet. And I read this over and over, which was Tsongkhapa's idea about Buddhism. And it certainly was very challenging for someone like me who was coming from a different tradition. Over the years, after that period, me and a person by Eric and another good friend of Bob's from the Dharma Bums, we opened up a place in Woodstock called the Kathmandu Cafe. And Bob would graciously come and on the patio would give the most beautiful talks on Buddhism, wisdom, and compassion, especially the inseparability of wisdom and compassion, which was a theme that right to the end he pounded, that wisdom without compassion is meaningless. During one of those talks, he made a short comment that burnt a hole in my brain, and it was this. He said, when we're on our deathbed, it'll be in the blink of an eye. And I don't know why, this was in the context of a whole lecture that he gave. When we're on our deathbed, it'll be in the blink of an eye. I've told people this over the years, this exact, when we're on the deathbed, it'll be here in the blink of an eye. What happened was, over the years, wherever we went, I became friends with a gentleman by the name of Shamdas. And Bob took a great affection to Sham, and through that, we would meet again. Shamdas was a pure theist. And I couldn't believe how affectionate he was to someone whose philosophy was so antithetical to, but there was no problem. He really took, and that to me showed the openness and the warm-heartedness. And of course, over the years, Bob's affection towards KD was amazing to me. Hari Buddha, Buddha Buddha, Hari Hare. This idea, I think over the years, this may be a misapprehension, I felt that he became more open and more eclectic and willing to expand, even though he didn't abandon his fundamental, he was open. And approximately a month and a half ago, a couple of weeks before Bob left us, he participated in an event at Stony Brook that I was at, and it was a discussion between a Swamiji and Bob, and the final question was, Bob, your shunyata, your emptiness, is it the same as the qualityless Brahman? And he thought about it, and his final answer was, ultimately, they're the same. They turned to the Swamiji, he said the same thing, and the discussion ended. And I thought, he really has opened up to a wonderful, comprehensive, accommodating view. He's been an influence on me, he's challenged me, he was obviously brilliant, and I'm just feel very fortunate that I had some time to be exposed to such a giant, a spiritual giant, who obviously affected so many people. So I'm happy to be here and share that story with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ira. So next, we'll invite up Sharon Gannon, also a Woodstock resident and co-founder of Jivamukti.
I also don't feel qualified to be here, but I was very happy to receive the invitation because I like all of you, love Bob. And so I guess that's a qualification. To speak about Bob would take millions of beings to even begin to comprehend, I think, the immensity. It's like the story of the elephant and the blind men, who each thought they knew what the elephant was like because they had contact with a piece of the elephant. And I'm one of those blind people. But I would like to share just a few stories that hopefully will convey how delightful and childlike I experienced Bob. I also met Bob through Lex Higson. Yes. His daughter India was a student at the Jivamukti school. And I met Bob and Nena together in their apartment in New York. Then Sham Das came into our lives, and that was a whole other tsunami. And I got a call from Sham Das, and he said, "We're on our way." I'm like, "Where?" "We're coming to your 4 o'clock yoga class." I'm like, "Who?" "Bhagavan Das, me, and Bob Thurman." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, great, all right." So they showed up, and of course, being with Sham Das, they were late. But they took front row seats, and Bob just laughed the whole time. It was like the class turned into a romper room. They reverted to become 6-year-olds, all 3 of these men. And then on the playlist, there was a Bhagavan Das song, which caused Bhagavan Das, if you know him, you will know what I mean, to sit up in full lotus and start loudly singing along, which caused Sham Das and Bob to sing along too. And if you know Bob, his voice, his singing voice, could not match his speaking voice, let's say. But a great time was had by all. And Sham Das appointed himself as Bob's personal trainer in the class and helped him with the asanas. Anyway, they were just involved in one giggle fit after the next. Very disruptive. Very, very disruptive. But everyone loved it, of course. We began to invite Bob to come and give talks at the yoga school. And one of the very first talks he gave was, he titled The Vacationer's Life. And it was about being a yogi. He said a yogi is on vacation. That's what a yogi is. That's the definition of a yogi. Someone who's on vacation. And he went on to describe a vacation from blaming, complaining, despairing, anger, all of those kind of things. He said, because those are the occupations of normal people. And a yogi is not a normal person. Bob was so full of joy. And of course, he taught us all directly from the Dalai Lama that joy is the way of life, that happiness is the purpose of life, compassion is the way to get there, but it is through joy that the compassion arises, and then this is the formula, and that will lead to happiness. I remember Bob having a conversation with me, and he said, "Do you know why I love the Buddha?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but I know you're going to tell me." And he goes, "Padma, just look at the pictures, look at the statues. Is he smiling or is he frowning?" All of them, he's smiling. So that's good news. Hold on to that. He sat under the tree, he got enlightened, and he came out smiling. So I want some of that. And that's why I love the Buddha. He could reduce things to these simple, delightful aphorisms that were just stunning. And like Ira said, they cracked you open and stayed with you forever. And I have many of those as well. In 1999, we had David and I were involved in a very ambitious project to create a New York City's first free spay and neuter clinic. And, well, the idea was to reduce the number of dogs and cats that are euthanized and then rendered into pet food. So Bob was like, "I want to be a part of this. I love dogs, Nana loves dogs, we're going to be a part of this." So a lot of people came to participate, and the actress Miranda Richardson flew in from London, and she read a story by James Thurber about a dog. And I was talking to Bob, and I said, what are you going to talk about? And he goes, "Well, I can tell a story about a dog too. That's what I'm going to do." So, he did have a competitive part to him at times. So he got up, and he, of course, told one of his very favorite, I'm sure you've all heard him tell the story of Asanga. And the meditating yogi meditated for 12 years, wanted to have a vision of the Buddha Maitreya, and it wasn't working, and he left the cave and was walking down the dusty road, and he comes across a dog who's dying, emaciated, crying, maggots eating her body, and he is filled with compassion, and he starts to pick out the maggots. But then she whimpers, and he realizes his fingers are hurting her, and then he's squeezing the maggots to kill them, and he's, I'm killing the maggots. So his compassion deepens, and he leans closer to her this suffering dog, and he uses his tongue. Well, Bob told the story so dramatically and much better than me, but he uses his tongue to take out each maggot and then deposit it. He takes a knife and cuts his own thigh and deposits the maggots in the gash that he has made, so the maggots have something to eat. Yes, thank you, Nana. And but then, of course, the dog transforms into who the dog really was and is, the Buddha Maitreya. So Bob would say, you never know. You never know who's in front of you. You must treat them, everyone, as the Buddha. As the Buddha, because that's actually who they are. They're giving you an opportunity. Bob was an optimist. He was a joyful optimist. There's a difference. I always thought of him as a sort of publicist for joy, and seemed to always be trying to find an angle, a convincing formula to promote joy as a way of life. One of his last teachings was about the power of hope. He insisted that we must never lose hope. He made a case for this by saying that the future is a mystery, and we all naturally want the future to be better. He identified joy as that hopeful moment in the present when we want a better future. He was emphatic that we must never extinguish that. We must always keep hope alive. That is the secret to joy, he said, and joy is the expression of happiness. Bob would always celebrate my birthday with me, Bob and Nena, and for so many years, David and I celebrated Bob's birthday with him. I am grateful to Bob for his delightful uplifting of my life and the lives of so many others. He taught us that happiness comes from joyfully doing all we can to make others happy. Bob told us, in the words of a 1960s soft machine song, hope for happiness. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Sharon. That was really nice. So our next speaker is one of Bob's longtime Dharma students in college, as well as after college, John Campbell, who got a PhD and has done some of the translation work with Bob, which is a really special way of actually getting to know Bob. And John's also a yoga teacher, and along with Michelle Lowe and Bob, has helped bring out the Vajra Yoga movement, which Bob was very passionate about at the end of his life. And so we hope that it will continue. So John, please take it away.
Okay. Well, it's a real privilege and a joy to be here. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you, Michael. And yeah, like as many people here would probably say, undoubtedly, Bob was one of the most important people in my life. I actually first encountered him as a high school student, and I think it was 1983 when I went to visit my high school friend over the summer, his eldest son, Gannon, in Amherst, Massachusetts. I think we had finished 10th grade, and the house was far out. It was really delightful. So I just knew him as my friend's dad, you know. And we got to share this epic expedition journey to either Providence Road, no, not Providence, what was it called? Provincetown, way out on Cape Cod, with no air conditioning. And that was, you know, so we really packed in there. But it was then many years later when I started studying the Indian inner sciences. I became a student of Sanskrit, and I decided to go back to school and pursue a doctorate. And I was fortunate to be taken in as one of his students. So I thought that, you know, among the various speakers here today, that I might say a few things about Bob's translation work in particular, because I think it was in particular, you know, something that you know, I experienced firsthand as Bob as a master translator and interpreter. And just to echo, if some of you were at the memorial on August 3rd, sort of echo some of the comments that my friend and colleague Tom Yarnell made, that you know, we marveled at his translation ability. You know, he would make a text come alive, and he would just devour it. So whereas I, you know, would still sort of piecing together, you know, elements of, you know, syntax and grammar, and he was just eating it and absorbing, you know, whole sections and really plumbing the depth of great works of wisdom. And it seemed to me pretty quickly that this was based upon having an experience of their meaning as well. So, you know, marveled at his mastery and ability to speed read, and his contribution to the modern understanding of in the modern Western languages of Buddhism was, you know, vastly advanced by the work that he did to Dharma generally, to Buddhist inner sciences, Indian inner sciences, I would say, generally, and particularly the genius of the Tibetan tradition. And what I wanted to mention, well, I guess I'll talk about two things connected. One is his translation work, and the other I'll mention is Vajra Yoga. His reverence for the tradition, and he absolutely loved the Dharma, obviously, but it didn't inhibit him from developing turns of phrase and terminology that really stretch the limits of the target language, English. And so he's actually, those of you who, you know, have some connection to the scholarly study of the Indian and Tibetan tradition, you might be aware of, you know, some of these coinages, or maybe you just encountered them in his popular writing, but coinage of terms such as addictive misknowledge, intrinsic identifiability, evolutionary action for karma, which is really genius, psychonaut, of course, that's all our favorite. One that was particularly groundbreaking for me personally was reading, actually, before I re-met him, which is an undergraduate, reading the Vimalakirti Sutra and his translation of upaya as liberative technique. And then he explained that in his own glossary as that this was an expression of the great compassion of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas, physical, verbal, and mental, a being empathetically aware of the troubles of living beings would devise the most potent and efficacious techniques possible to remove those troubles. And the troubles of living beings are removed effectively only when they reach liberation. So this liberative technique coinage then gave way later to art, symbolized by Vajra, the powerful, originally in the Vedic context, as a weapon, a symbol of the most powerful thing. But the Vajra comes identified with power, energy, and efficacy. So in the Vimalakirti, the figure of Vimalakirti is very important in the Buddhist tradition. It's a sutra from, that became enormously influential in East Asia too. Vimalakirti is exceptional because he's a lay person. He frequents the casinos, it says, and racetracks. He's like a Vimalananda type. And he's introduced in a chapter titled Inconceivable Skill in Liberative Technique, which then he would later describe as art. So as a Nirmanakaya, Vimalakirti was an embodiment of liberative art in his actions, the creative art of liberating living beings. So in his last interview, you can still see this, and I encourage you to something called like the Great Bob Thurman. It was the last interview he gave online was with Daniel Aiken of the publisher of Wisdom. And he referred to a legacy that he wished to give to his students, like myself, who were also translators, and that in particular that it was, if nothing else, that they would understand the difference between translating up and translating down. And what he meant by this was that in translating up, there was a recognition that what you were bringing into the target language was something that would enhance and improve or expand the possibilities of knowledge in that target language. In other words, that what you were translating was something of practical value to the culture that was taking this in. And when you start to consider the possibilities that are opened by that, you then, most people here, or I would say, just looking out, it looks like most people here were raised in the Western world. The Western world was, in some ways, we continue to live out the legacy even of the Renaissance, right? So the Renaissance is the result of individuals encountering what became obscure for many centuries, and that was the world of antiquity, of the Greek and Roman knowledge, and which of course was also included the Arabic tradition. And so this rediscovery of something that was conceived of as being actually superior to what was possible and understandable in Europe at the time, then it exploded the parameters of what was possible to know and in knowledge. So in this sense, Bob's work completely followed in the model of the Tibetan genius, his work is most closely associated with, and that is, of course, Jey Tsong Khapa, who died in the early 15th century. And in that, Bob shared Tsong Khapa in his dedication to the Nalanda tradition. He regarded these scriptural sources in the Shastras as a coherent set of texts located in a philosophically timeless and enduring intellectual present. And he saw it as his main task to penetrate and to interpret as faithfully as possible the intent of the thinking of these scholars who he was encountering, or for that matter, the Buddha, and thus contributing to the clarification of the final import of the teaching of the Buddha himself, which had significant consequences for the culture into which the knowledge was being imported. And this then makes me want to mention Vajra Yoga. So one of his last big translation choices, he would riff off of what had for many, really centuries in the West been, it was sort of almost orthodoxy. You had to translate certain Sanskrit terms or Tibetan terms in a certain way, and then Bob would redefine them. So bodhicitta became spirit, or first enlightening spirit eventually ended up with. But one of the last ones that I personally encountered in my work with him was the retranslation of the word samaya. This word is almost always translated as commitment. And it is in a context of the Vajrayana in particular, where in an initiatory context, a practitioner commits themselves to certain daily activities, and particularly daily perspectives, because Buddhism isn't about isn't ethics based upon rules. I guess they call that deontological. I think that's the fancy word for it. It is about changing the way you experience the world. It's about changing and cultivating a new way of experiencing the world. And so this shift in his translation of Samaya, when he just burst out, I think this is only a few months ago, he says, it has to be vow. I say, why vow? I mean, there's plenty of good words for vow. And he says, because of its cognate words, votary, and then finally devotion. And it really, showed me the direction that he was being inexorably drawn. Ira spoke so beautifully about this, which was to the heart expanding nature of Dharma. And I just jumped through some more stuff. Please. You would see him in KD's kirtan, and he was it was his favorite thing to do, and he had the bhav, it was surging through him clearly. So I'll finish with this personal anecdote. So when I was first at Columbia, I didn't actually know any Tibetan. I was taught for the alphabet for one semester by the late great Gen Jamspel, who was a Ladakhi, a brilliant scholar who was living in the US for many years. I think some of you were very close with him, and he was a wonderful and profound teacher himself. And so, armed with only the Tibetan alphabet, I started attending the graduate Buddhist seminar, which was Bob reading texts with his graduate students, and it was sort of a round robin. Whoever happened to be working on a text at the time who he wanted to focus on. At the time, it was our old friend Albion Butters, who was translating the great Longchenpa. Now, if you are familiar at all with the Tibetan tradition, I mean, right up there with translating Tsong Khapa is translating Longchenpa, who was one of the great, most important figures for the Nyingma tradition, and then later for the Rimé tradition. And this was a very difficult text on what they call drupta, which is or siddhanta, the definition of different philosophical schools. And so I sit down there, and and they're reading along, and I just couldn't, I was barely keeping up with the letters, and he's absorbing, like I said, he's devouring, the translation, roaring corrections at Albion. He's just like totally. Albion's like, yeah, but couldn't it be? And then he's like, no, that's wrong. And what I came away from, and then I encourage all of you, really, I believe it was his last popular book was Wisdom is Bliss. And I really encourage you to go and look at it, because my experience of his absolutely like almost ridiculous confidence in me that I could, at least at some point, come to the point where I was able to read this material and make sense of it. As a student, he had that confidence in me as a student. And the gist of his expression of the Dharma and the entire point of the Eightfold Path is this overwhelming confidence that he had in the basic goodness of beings, and of the evolutionary perfectibility of beings, which he believed to be at the heart of Dharma. And I guess that then comes down finally to, I've said this was going to be about translation. So the last point is that, his confidence in the ability of the English language to accommodate the necessary maneuvers, not just to match concepts. Those of you who are familiar with with Chinese Buddhism will know that there was a period of translation there where the best that they could do was so-called matching concepts. They would get only the best they could do was Sanskrit terms like dharma and shunyata and so forth would be matched with something that was sort of like that in Taoism. And it was only after several centuries and the intervention of the great Central Asian master Kumarajiva, who was then able to basically create a new language within Chinese that could then that could penetrate the meaning. And I think Bob is doing both. I didn't see him, going into, maybe there's some neologisms that I'm not thinking of, but it's mostly just this overwhelming enthusiasm for and stretching and the determination. You don't own this language. We own this language. You own this language. Allow it to. So he would sort of go for it, and whatever. Abhisheka would become communion, and things like sacrosanct. You could never use these terms because they've already been owned by such and such a tradition. So, parting word is that he loved people that he encountered, and he believed in them, and to my constant surprise, and he really believed in me, and I'm deeply grateful for having been part of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, wow. I went along for the ride. Thank you. So our next speaker is a very close friend of Bob and Nena's, who was or is a psychiatrist and a neighbor, and who joined the Tibet House board a few years ago, and was also, with her husband Paul, was the provider of the Sunday dinners at the Thurman household, which were like holding court with various characters who would come in and out of the house. So, Ina, without any further ado, over to you.
Yeah, I'm not that tall, so we need this lower. Yeah, okay.
If you just believe.
No, internally I'm 7 feet tall, but no, I'm kidding. So after all this scholarship, all I have to offer is lots of friendship, lots of admiration, love for Bob and Nana, who changed my life, basically, and I'll tell you how it started, which was relatively recent as far as Bob goes. So I met him, I think, in around 1997, where I was working at Columbia Presbyterian as a doctor, and he was coming with some Tibetan physicians, and they were talking about medicine and stuff, and he was translating, and he was going fluently from English to Tibetan to questioning something in Sanskrit and right back to English, and without a pause in it. And then shortly thereafter, my friend Joe Luizzo, who's also a student of Bob's, was staying at my house up here in Woodstock, and we had to go over to Bob and Nana's house for for some scholarship that Joe was working on regarding Nagarjuna. So this is 1997. I barely touched the surface of Buddhism. I have no idea who Nagarjuna is. I go, I'm overwhelmed and delighted by the house, which is not your typical American ranch house, shall we say. And then, so the first day is fine, and they talk about Nagarjuna, and I understand like every third word and something. And the next day we had to go back for something, and here comes Bob Thurman outside the house with his chainsaw that he's holding loosely on one side because he had just taken down a tree. And then they talked about Nagarjuna again, and I was completely hooked. And so I started studying everything I could get my whole hands on that Bob had created and other writers about Buddhism had written. And I just also enjoyed very much the psychology of it, and that blended so wonderfully well with what I was trying to do. I, at the time, had been already a yoga student for like 5 to 7 years or something. So it all gelled and it all like kept growing. So fast forward to 2008, and I now have a surface understanding of the term emptiness or shunyata. And I have the opportunity to go to New Delhi with Bob, Nana, and about 200 other people to a teaching on emptiness, shunyata. And that's where Paul and I met. And so we started up and we practiced non-emptiness for a while. And then once we realized we were back in Woodstock, and Paul says, let's go over to Bob and Nana and let's cook dinner on Sunday. And I said, okay. And so we pack up all kinds of food, and I like to cook, so I have some ideas on recipes, and we go over there. And that turned into like 18 years of Sunday dinners. Not every Sunday, but many Sundays. And some of those conversations are just what has been offered so far here. Others were much more practical and wild and amazing, you know. And then one of the highlights, personal highlights for me was, and I love Bob dearly, so I know he would like me to tell this story. I think it was, 2019, and he goes, all doctors just care about money. And I said, that's not true. And he says, yes, it is. And I goes, how do you know? You don't know that many doctors. And off we went. So it got loud. And back and forth, until about 15 minutes later, Nana shut us down, thank God. It was like sort of two kids on the playground going back at each other and stuff. And so nobody won, but then once it was kind of calm again, Bob says, so now we can be better friends. And that was so true, because it's sort of like when you open up anything, vulnerable wound or disagreement and conflict, and he was very able to do all that. So then we did become better friends. The dinners got better. The recipes, I think, got better. Nana, you tell me. we switched to like grow a new body type schedule, and it got way healthier. The ice cream was downsized. So fewer desserts. And Bob could still, he would usually be upstairs. We would come in, we would prepare, and then I would call him on the phone and say, they're here. And he would come downstairs and he would share, like, joyfully, enthusiastically, whatever he was working on and translating. And sometimes he was not double booked, he was triple booked. And he would have to disappear in the midst of dinner, go back upstairs, do a Zoom, and then come back for dinner. And so I'll never forget those conversations. And then Bob and Nana asked me to be on the board of Tibet House to try and help this organization. So I hope that we can all channel Bob into allowing us to help these wonderful teachings to continue. And, you know, as a psychiatrist, I mean, the psychology of the West and the psychology of the East are just that wonderful tool for joy, happiness, and a sense of well-being. And that's what I'll leave you with. And as Bob says, emptiness is the womb of compassion. So let's all practice it if we can, if you understand what emptiness is.
So then, Paul, could you please come up and share? Paul is I never really learned how you met Bob, but it's been forever, I think. And the first time I came to his house, we ended up in the sauna together, and Professor Thurman became Bob, and you were there, and you're just awesome. So anything you have to share?
Well, thank you. Well, again, thank you, Michael, for moderating this. And if Michael Raphael is here, thank you. And if he's not here, please convey to him our appreciation for all of this. So a lot of times when you would begin like a Buddhist teaching, they would say, well, get your back straight, active and relax, quiet your mind, enter into stillness. But with Bob, it never went that way. With Bob, it was like a, James Joyce, Ulysses stream of consciousness with like the verve and the energy of like Ornette Coleman. And he would just present a view of reality that just completely blew my mind and kind of inspired me to a way of life that to this very moment I still am very inspired and live by. So thank you, Bob. It seemed that it was just yesterday, but it was over 40 years ago that I remember my first kind of experience with Bob as a teacher when he was with Yeshe Dun, and it was at the Mount Tremper. It was at the Zen monastery before it was the Zen monastery. And it was like 110 in the shade, and he was kind of passionately, they were translating this heart sutra, this medical sutra with Yeshe Dun, who at the time was the personal physician to His Holiness. And it was this glorious weekend. One side note, I had hepatitis a long time before, and so we had to bring in our urine in these kind of rice bowls. So Yeshe Dun looked at the rice bowl and says, well, whose is that? And it was mine. He looked in my eyes, he says, well, you had hepatitis, but you're okay now. That was like 7 years before. So out of that, my wife Judy and I was there in the first place because my wife Judy was very much involved in health and all of that. So we then actually began that tradition of having these Sunday night dinners with them. And then at a certain point they said, well, we're going to Tibet and you just have to come. So the next thing we knew, I had become like a Chinese peasant because Judy, like she had a dispensary, she had like a whole meat. I had big bags and then middle-sized bags and then little bag. I was like carrying, and it was literally like this Chinese peasant who could also speak Chinese, so that kind of came in handy. And so the next thing we knew, we were in Tibet. This was like 6 weeks in China and Tibet, places that were sacred to Manjushri. And as we were the two married couples, we ended up traveling together. We would stay in the same kind of units. And if like you're like second class in an overnight train for like 2 days with the two of them who occupied a huge amount of space. It was quite something. So needless to say, it became very intimate and we really got to know each other. And so that was Tibet. Bob was, wherever we went, when the Tibetans, local Tibetans found out that Bob knew the Dalai Lama, they would all like break into tears and get very emotional and say, oh my God, this is really what's happening, it's terrible. And we would have one very emotional scene after the other. And so Bob would say, well, what are you practicing? What are you doing? And then he would, of course, know it, and he would just rev up their engines. And in fact, this was my first experience with Bob, where basically he was sort of the quintessential warm-up band. He would just get you going, in terms of, and then his own teachings during that time, it was largely dealing with like great compassion, the exchange of self and other, and bodhicitta. This mind of enlightenment that is based on everyone else helping. You're not enlightened until you help everyone else become enlightened. You're not happy until you help everyone else become happy. So that was really, when I think back on those days, it was also a time that wherever Bob went, I just followed him. I was like his Sancho Panza. I was his Tonto. And I just it became sort of like Buddhism by osmosis. And we just, a lot of it, we'd hang out on the roof of the Jogong. It was interesting with all the monks, they would serve us a lot of buttered tea. And at some point in the afternoon, it became beer. And we just had these wonderful, wonderful times together. And when we came back to New York, he introduced me to Gaelic Rinpoche, and who kind of with this big hug. And then it began like this whole area where I started working with Gaelic Rinpoche. At that time, I think Nin and I we would go into Tribeca, because he had a center here, and then we actually flew to Ann Arbor a few times for a couple of Vajrayogini retreats and so forth. And at the same time, this is back like in the late 80s and 90s, there was this group called Lindisfarne that was created by William Irwin Thompson, and he was sort of this cultural historian from MIT who very much inspired, influenced by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin on his kind of whole in creating a new society. So Bill would bring together all of these scholars, these mathematicians, people like Joan Halifax, Baker Roshi, John Lovelock, John Michel, Keith Critch, I don't know if you know these people, Ralph Abraham, Francisco Varela, and they would just, it would be like during August, we would spend 2 or 3 weeks in August in Crestone, Colorado, and Bob and Nina would come. And a lot of the subject matter was Christian mysticism, was a lot of Rudolf Steiner, and they all acted as if Rudolf Steiner was it. I mean, he was not just any avatar, but it was sort of this Christ moment was really pivotal. So they would talk and this and that, and then Bob would just present a talk. And it was interesting how a person who has such a strong ego as Bob would then give this talk that was completely free of ego, that would just kind of lay things out and just kind of present a view of reality that was just really filled with joy, and it was practical and sensible, so that everyone in the room, you could see it like their personal shticks kind of melting away, and it would end in a kind of silence. So Bob would just go on this stream of consciousness oration, and eventually he would say, well, and that's all I have to say. And everyone was in like complete silence. Even Bill Thompson, who was never lost for words, all he could really do was smile. So it was really during that time and then I would just continue, like my relationship with Bob was that he would do all this stuff, and then we would just talk, because we would always be hanging out. He would give me books to read, and then we would just talk about it. So we would just have this ongoing conversation, and we got really close during that time. And then coming back to New York, I remember like every spring, Nina and I would drive into town, and we would completely fill up her car with like cartons of plants. And then we would get back to the house, and she would forget, so, oh my God, I got all these plants, what were we gonna do? So then Bob and I, we would go down into the garden, and we would prepare all the beds, which there were quite a few, and then plant all of the plants, and then we would just have countless hours together gardening with Nina, and we're just spending a great deal of time in the garden. Again, the chainsaw. So Bob, forget this sword of Manager Shri. His sword really was the chainsaw. And I realized that part of my job was to kind of keep him out of trouble. And so one time he's going there and he's cutting off this huge plant, or it was like a tree, and the next he had gashed his leg. I mean, it was really like, it was sort of terrifying. But again, it was just this hanging out together. They also gave me a room in their Columbia apartment that I could stay in, so that so that whenever I was in New York, I could stay there. And so again, there was like all of this time that we would be spending together that was sort of in between. I mean, a lot of times they say that when you have your teachings, your meditations, that it's really what happens in the sessions, or in the time in between the sessions, that really is a judge of how good your practice is. So that I just found that I was really spending a lot of time with Bob in between the events, at his house, just hanging out, talking, and all of that. And I realized that he was not really a colleague. We were not really colleagues. It was a much more personal relationship that we had developed, where in reality he was more of a big brother to me. It was funny because it seemed that at all times he would have like 3 suitcases. There was one that he just said, come back, and that was kind of in a state of turmoil. There was one that was ready to go, and that was sort of indicative of sort of the nature of the house, and I won't really go into that anymore. It was quite a scene. At the same time, I guess during that time, my wife Judy, who was also very close, we were continuing with all of these Sunday night dinners. She was having some serious health problems, and eventually she passed away. I guess it was in 2004, and it still is. I mean, when I look back at the kind of the tenderness and the love that Bob and Nina showed to Judy, it was, I mean, thank you, Nina. I mean, it was just an incredibly tender, I mean, loving moments that, you know, just, it'll always be in my heart. But then in 2008, we were off to India, again, you know, for the teaching with His Holiness, like a small group of 200 people. And that's where I met Ina. And we came back, and that was like in the spring of 2008. So by that summer, we were living together. I mean, and then we were continuing with the dinners. But with these dinners, with Ina now involved, it really became an art form. It was really just a whole different thing. So it was your presence there really made all the difference. You know, in terms of just all the. By that time, Menla was flourishing, and every Sunday night, whoever was at Menla with Bob would just come over, and it would be like this time where we would just talk endlessly. But I do have to say that, you know, until the very end, it always ended with Bob eating the ice cream right out of the bucket. I mean, it was. I mean, I was trying to clean up my act, and I was sort of trying to stop ice cream, but Bob, no, he got to the point he just would eat it right out of the bucket. So it brings us kind of more recently, where in my life more recently, or in the last couple of years, I was sort of deepening my Taoist practice, and periodically would infuse with certain Jewish stuff. And I was sort of, you know, into kind of creating a better discipline in my life, you know, being a little bit less outrageous than before. And Bob and Nina, you know, all I can say is that if I had to characterize them, they were just these kind of cosmic juvenile delinquents. And it was, we'd have this great time together, but it was like, oh my God. And so, but with Bob, we would just, you know, aside from all of his other adventures, which I really can't talk about, I found that there's all these things I just couldn't agree with him. He was just, it was like, you know, politically, culturally, it was just, oh my God, it was just, he really was just completely stretching, pushing the envelope. We had all these conversations about Judaism. I mean, if there's anyone, like, I think that both Bob and Nina, we're not particularly fond of monotheism. And I would keep trying to tell us, look, you know, in my Judaism and the Jews that I hang out with, we don't really believe in God. That's not really the point. I mean, that's not how we practice. It's really, we want to create a socially just society, and there are other things that we do that really, it's not the kind of monotheism that you may have. But he'd ignore, he says, look, I think Abraham Lincoln was really Jewish. I mean, his mother was, he never went to church, and he only quoted from the Old Testament, you know. And then he would have me read this book by Joseph Atwill called Shakespeare Messiah, and in it he talked about there was this Jewish musician who lived in Venice, and he went to England and was hired by Henry VIII to be a court musician, and he married this kind of progressive Protestant woman and they gave birth to this Emilia Bassano, this young Jewish girl who was educated in 2 royal houses, became the mistress to this patron of the arts, and that many people believe that she actually was Shakespeare. And so Bob said that the scholarship was compelling. It was really, you know, he said, you know, so I said, okay, you know, Bob. I mean, he was really trying to kind of make me, you know, be more comfortable with Judaism than, you know, I said, okay, it's okay. So then recently, I mean, with passing of Bob, I mean, it's almost as if finally with his passing, everything, all of his craziness, all of this stuff finally made sense. You know, that it was interesting when we were in Tibet at one point, and we were at this full moon ceremony at this tantric temple. It was kind of spooky. I mean, I actually found Tibet kind of medieval and rather spooky. But and he said, Bob said, well, that monk over there, he's just saying hello because he knew you in a past lifetime, and he says it's really great to see you again. And he said, well, you know, and you know that I knew you and Judy as the Manchu couple in the last Chinese dynasty and during the Italian Renaissance. You know, all of this very matter of fact. So that when Judy had died in 2004, Bob says, he would call me, he says, don't be sad. Everything is okay. She's on her way. So when Bob finally passed, I said, well, I mean, to me it was bittersweet. It was very sad, but I didn't really. To me, there's a joyousness to it, because finally all of the stuff that he was talking about, all of this whole reality that moves through death and that is imbued with joy, that it was not a matter of does it happen, is it going to happen, but when is it going to happen, and that it's actually happening right now. That his present teaching is that this is really what it is to die. This is really, if you've done your homework, if you've done work, then you can communicate with Bob. It was interesting that at one point with Gaelic Rinpoche, I was doing a practice, and you kind of impose the head of your guru into the deity, and I told Bob, it's just not working with Gaelic Rinpoche. So he said, try the Dalai Lama. And I said, Bob, it's still not working. And it just either works or it doesn't work. So then Gaelic Rinpoche died, and I went back to Bob. I said, now it's working, Bob. Now, these kind of communications are just bizarre. Bob would even say that in Tibetan history, a lot of times you would kind of make political decisions knowing that this person was going to reincarnate as that person, and so you can have, you want to go for that guy because he's going to become this and that, and so it's all a very matter of fact reality, where death is just another, maybe a little bit more important moment in time. So that's how I see it now. I mean, it's almost as if we get the best of Bob. He's now like this cosmic teddy bear, none of the downside. I mean, I have to say that with Bob, everyone would say, "We love Bob, but why do it well when you can do it yourself?" I mean, is what Gandhi would always say. So, but now it's as if Bob is always there. I mean, and there's just joy and there's bliss. I mean, it's as if we get it, Bob. So, all I can say is that while we all miss Bob, we should really know that he's here. Everything is just around the corner, and it's only a matter of time before we're all back together, having another good time together. And I love you, Bob. And thank you all so much.
You can tell Bob is here because all of the speakers so far have gone over our allotted time. I apologize to anyone who thought that they were going to say something at the end. That may not be possible. However, on the Tibet House website, which is where this is being live streamed, there is a place for everyone to post memories, pictures, any sort of farewell remarks about Bob and to Bob. And so we invite you to do that. So we have 3 more speakers, and our next speaker, Marcela Lobos, with her husband Alberto Villaldo, co-founded the Four Winds Society, and they are very much shamans. And when they connected with Bob, it was like a long time recognition in the works, and he was electrified by what you guys did, and so we're happy to have you share some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. And actually, my husband, Alberto Villaldo, founder of the Four Winds Society over 4 decades ago. Four Winds Society is an shamanic energy medicine school that has taken some of the programs to Menla. And that's how we met Bob and Nena about 8 years ago. But he's probably the one that should be standing here because he's the one that spent more time with Bob recording programs like the way beyond death, to go to the beyond. So that's a program that maybe at some point could be available because they really dive deep into what happens after we die. Nevertheless, so I met Nena and Bob 8 years ago together with my husband while holding a gathering of graduates from our school at Menla. Immediately, I was impressed by their openness and grounded presence. That was the beginning of a collaboration in which, as I mentioned, Alberto mostly got to teach with Bob, but then we also shared a few intimate events with them and close friends. In one of those occasions, Bob shared how he met Nena, and I will never forget the image he painted in my mind, the image of this dazzling, whirling dakini who got him completely intoxicated with her presence. Now, we know what dakinis do best. They cut through the BS and illusions from ego clinging. So while I'm here to speak about Bob and his legacy, I want to begin by acknowledging the woman who was along his side the whole way. His wife, mother of his children, and muse, Nena. I am a student and teacher of all things Jung, and from this perspective, I know that Bob embodied the archetype of the wise old man, but he also embodied the kind of wise old man most deeply respected in the shamanic traditions I come from in the Andes, the one whose wisdom cannot be domesticated. This is true wisdom because it is like nature itself. Salka, we say in Quechua, wild, free, wild, free, and undomesticatable, known as crazy wisdom in Tibet. This is close to the idea of being like a child with an open and curious mind. I remember Osho saying, the difference between adults and children is that adults play games while children simply play. That was Bob for me. He played. His mind was playful, even when he was speaking about the most serious things. In the wisdom traditions of the Andes, we say, take your work, take your mission seriously, but take yourself lightly. I have an image of Bob in Chile when he visited us in our sanctuary, hugging a 400-year-old tree and going through the labyrinth and the spiral and the land in our sanctuary like a child. He approached everything with a freshness of mind, with a willingness to meet the world as it for the first time. I always saw Bob and Nena as extraordinarily generous with their knowledge, never hesitating to teach, to share, to enlighten others. In my tradition, we will call them earth keepers, people who truly care for all sentient beings. Bodhisattvas, we would say in Buddhism. But I also saw in Bob something of the star keeper, through his willingness to dream new and more compassionate worlds into being, Buddha lands. Aho. And somehow that is what Menla is, a true nature and wisdom sanctuary where the land speaks, the Dharma is shared, and people heal. I am honored to be holding a Four Winds Society retreat right now as we speak at Menla. 8 years after that first gathering that brought us together, we are back, and I know it will not be the last time. I look forward to continuing to honor Bob and Nena's legacy by supporting Menla and Tibet House, and by standing behind the work of those who will carry their vision forward. Thank you, Michael, for being one of those people. All my relations, aho.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Our next speaker is Nina Rao, who is a chant master of her own and has taught and co-taught with Bob at Menla many times and has been around for, at least 15 years coming to Menla, at least. Maybe the whole 20, I forget. But please.
Thanks for having me, Michael. I have known Bob Thurman for about 15 years. But I think only in his passing from this realm that I understood how important he was to me and is to me. I am not a formal student, definitely not a colleague, though ever since the moment I met him, he encouraged me to find that place of understanding inside myself and to share that with others through the words that I speak and through my chanting and through the relationships that I have with people. I first met him, I think I was trying to trace back, because in some ways I feel like I've known him forever. But I went for lunch. I went to Tibet House, actually, for a teaching that he was doing with Sharon Salzberg and Mark Epstein that he used to do regularly at Tibet House. And first, I was amazed that Tibet House even existed. I felt like I was standing on top of a mountaintop monastery, and it was alive with him. And so I listened to the teachings, and I was invited to go for lunch with him and Sharon and Mark, who I knew in other ways. He didn't know me at all, but he looked right at me and he said, "Where shall we go for lunch?" And he linked his arm in mine, and we started walking down the street, such a force. And the whole time we were walking down the street, he kept looking at me and saying, "Muni, Muni." So Muni means sage, or one who knows. And so it was almost like a mantra for me, that was positioned in my heart. And we had a beautiful lunch, and I felt so grateful for having met him. Some years later, I was chanting in Maui at a Ramdas retreat in a fundraiser in Maui for the Maui Food Bank, and Krishna Das couldn't be there that year. So I was asked to lead the chanting, and I was already nervous because everyone was expecting to chant with him, and there I was. And Ramdas was going to be in the audience too, which he was. And so I was just sitting down to sing, and in walks Bob Thurman, and I was even more nervous. I started chanting, and I got off the stage, and he was so full, he was sitting on the floor, on the aisle, in his sort of humble way that he is. And he stood up and he said, "Ananda Mahima." And I thought to myself, my goodness, how could anyone? And, he would say that to me over and over again. So if you know who Ananda Mahima, she's a great saint from India who he had met with Nana some years ago. And he would keep calling me Ananda Mahima every time we were in front of other people. And, I felt embarrassed. And gradually I began to understand that he really saw in me, and he made it possible through his words that we can imagine ourselves to be those that we adore. And so I couldn't understand any of his teachings. I tried, but I did my best to absorb what was being communicated through those teachings, and that we all have the capacity for wisdom, which comes from compassion and love. And the one time that I asked him, I said, "Bob," because we would sit in these retreats together, and one of the things he loved to do is to ask Krishna Das and Robert Svoboda about their gurus and Maharaji, and he would ask me, and ultimately he understood that my guru was Siddhima, and he asked me for a book, and then he would call me Siddhima, So I had no choice. I had to bear that and open into that possibility. But I said to him, I said, Bob, you talk so much, we learn so much of philosophy from you, we learn about politics, we learn about science. And then when I found out that he had actually gone to study with Al Gore about climate change, well, then he stole my heart completely. And he was my first guest on my podcast about the environment and so on. So I asked him, I said, who are you devoted to? Like, do you have a guru? This was some time ago. And later on, he spoke about Geshe Wangyal and, of course, the Dalai Lama we know. And he thought for a minute, and he said, I'm devoted to everyone. And I believed him, and I still believe him. And I think that's, for me, the greatest lesson that I've learned. And that we can all be that way. We can all be the great mother. He always wanted me to represent the sacred feminine on stage and always push me up there to speak about that and really try to embody that which I have learned from my teachers. And that includes Bob. Thank you.
Okay, we have a little bit more time for Nina's right-hand man and also chant master, Krishna Das, who's a longtime friend and was at the first retreat at Menla with Bob and Sharon.
He was so kind. He saw the best in everybody. And every time he talked to you or looked at you or interacted with you, he would bring out the best. I first met Bob and Nina on the ridge in Almora, 1971. We were on our way to Kosani. They had been living in Almora, and he told me in those days he was very mad at Ram Dass. So when he would drive a sick person from Almora to the hospital in Nainital, he would drive right by Kenchi, and he wouldn't stop to see Maharaji because he was angry at Ram Dass. But when we finally dragged him to Maui to the retreats there, he said, Ram Dass has really become a saint. It's late. I'm not going to talk too much because if I do, I'll cry more. But one thing I'm going to do, where he is now, there aren't A&Ps, Stop and Shops, and stuff like that. So one thing we shared very deeply together, I'm going to share with him now and offer it to him in case he's ran out of money up there. So here we go. May your heart always be full and your stomach always be full of Cheerios and raisins. I love you more than life.
All right, so we actually do have a few minutes. So I didn't upset the organizers too much. Thank you all for sharing so authentically and from your hearts. There's a microphone over to my left. If anyone would like to make brief shares, we have about 15 minutes.
I'm a a writer and a journalist. My name is Kay Larson. I was that for about 20 years, and then one day in Japan, I walked into an ancient Zen temple, and my hair stood on end, and I didn't know what to do about it. But I came back and I practiced Zen for a while, and then I walked over the other side of Woodstock to the Tibetans. So I've known Bob Thurman in different aspects for some time. And I remember the last few conversations I had with him when I recognized something amazing about him, which is that he had this vast understanding of the origins of Buddhism, of the methods of Buddhism, of the language, of the history, all of that, all the way back to the places that fascinate me, the Nalanda and the early recognition of what this praxis is about. And he had all of that, but he had something else too. He had this burning understanding of what it was to practice, to actually practice. So it was like all of everything he was the groundwork, and then on top of all of that was his practice. And his practice was fierce and genuine and completely heartfelt. And I still remember him for the depth and the quality of that practice. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you.
Can you ask her to wait? Yeah. Ask her to wait. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I forgot the gentleman's name who was talking about the beer on the rooftop. But
Paul.
you mentioned Paul. You mentioned Rudolf Steiner. I'm a Waldorf kid, so that struck an interesting chord for me. And I'm very new to Tenzin Bob's teachings. I, first encountered him about a year ago at Boone. And I was curious if there were any other teachers that were sort of nonlinear in Bob's life that someone like me wouldn't find unless I was at a place like this, hearing you say something like Rudolf Steiner. I mean, I know there's the lineage of a lot of the main things that he studied and you guys talked about, but I was just curious if anybody on stage had any other encounters with some of those teachers that maybe influenced him that I wouldn't be able to find unless one of you said something here. So.
Well, I don't know if any of them are still alive, but I would say that Chris Bamford, if you can, he was, more of into Christian esotericism. He was not as much a devotee to Rudolf Steiner. The other ones were really like completely devoted to Rudolf Steiner. He was it. He was like more important than Christ. But with Chris Bamford, he would draw you to tears. I would urge you to kind of, maybe you can, contact Evan Thompson, who is Bill's son, maybe Julian Lines. I could help you with that if you want to. I think Chris Bamford would be the one that would really, he touched me the most. I would always be drawn to tears when he would talk, Bob had mixed feelings about Rudolf Steiner. He was,
But he really liked Julian, and Julian has the Madagiri Center in Mount Tremper, right?
Julian is the real chronicler of a lot of that. Julian Lines, who was at Madagiri.
It's a Sri Aurobindo Center. Oh, I think David Mellon, were you going to say something? Or Sam, you want to share?
No, David.
Thank you all. The mark of a great teacher is that his teachings help you when it really counts, not just when you're, thinking about things, but when the things get difficult. And Bob was a inspirational but a challenging at times, aggravating mentor, and he goaded me a lot. And when I came to study Buddhism as an undergraduate at Columbia, I came from a Zen perspective originally and very attached to the idea of sudden enlightenment and direct engagement with emptiness, and Bob was highly intent on getting me to recognize the superiority of the gradual path involving wisdom, and one in which you gradually approached the ability to directly intuit wisdom. I did a thesis on the Samye debate, which is about that precise debate between the Subhitist, the sudden approach, and the graduous approach. And in Tibet, the graduous approach emerged victorious, but I somehow wanted to hold on to them both. And Bob would say things to me like, when we were having a meeting and I said, Bob, I have to go, I have to get to the airport, I have to catch a plane, he would go, well, just go there, suddenly. Many years later, I found myself skiing in Italy, and the conditions were really not very satisfying at all. It was pretty icy, no powder. But I went off the trail, and I found 18 inches of powder through the woods, and it was like, oh man, this is so great, and it was getting really steep, and I was having so much fun. And then I just had this intuition, something's not right. This is gonna go to a cliff band. And I stopped, and I decided to walk back up, except that the snow was up to my stomach, and every step took 30 seconds, and I'd have to catch my breath and then take another step. And I said, well, I'll just go down again, and I'll just wing it. I'll hope for the best. And I was like, no, go back up. And I said, just go slow, take one step every minute, and walk all night. Don't fall asleep, and you'll live. And I proceeded to do that. And after an hour, I'd gone 30 feet, and I probably had about half a mile to go. I just kept on going, and I thought about Bob a lot. And then the sun set. I thought, it's going to get dark. And I go, but we just got to keep on doing. And when the sun set, the snow got hard, and I could just walk right on top of it. And no matter half an hour, I was at the top of the mountain. And I lived. And what Bob had taught me made sense. And so the gradual path emerged very, very useful and saved my ass. Thank you, Bob. I love you.
Thank you, David. I was pretty sure I resolved that one by saying, it's gradual until it's sudden. So it's both. But anyway, Nidhi.
Michael knows the story. I told it to you in Sunflower. But it gives me a lot of faith, because I don't want to get too political, but I feel like this is a rainbow tribe. We're in Woodstock, and I feel like I'm speaking to the choir. I'm one of the therapists at Menland. Thank you, Nana and Bob, so much. And I think I'm going to cry because it's my favorite place to work, to do what you do. And thank you, Michael, for your leadership as well. And thank you all these teachers who I've been blessed to study with there. I didn't think I was going to cry. But I was working. It was a few days before he passed away. And I just had this vibe. I had to go. And I was supposed to meet my husband. I had all these other things and da-da-da. And I'm like, I texted my husband, I'm like, I'm going to be a little late, honey. I feel like I want to go see Bob's lecture. And I think it was with you, Krishna Das. It was one of his last retreats. It was his last retreat there. So I don't know if it was his last lecture there or one of the last. And I don't remember the question someone asked, But his response is like, when you leave the meat suit, and he got really excited, you get such great liberation. And he goes, and personally, I'm going to mess with Trump and MAGA. I'm taking them down. And it wasn't like if I go before Trump or if this and that, but it was like it's like he knew. And my father, and I told Bob this story, my father, who I've been attracted to Tibetan Buddhism my whole life, even though I'm Hindu and I grew up in a Hindu house and I've studied Sanskrit and Tibetan Buddhism. My father had that same thing. He knew. And he got blessed by a Tibetan Lama, and I had shown Bob the picture, and he was going to research who it was. He was at Tavang Monastery, and he was just eating a samosa and drinking chai. His friends, he had friends of 30 years there. They went to India every year and went to a different location, and he's like, I'm just going to drink chai. I don't want to go in that. It's religious, stupid shit. So he's drinking chai, and some Lama went and blessed him, blessed his third eye, and then he dropped dead that next day in front of a Shiva temple. That's my other thing that I do. And I've always said prayers for my papa. And I told Bob that story, and he was like, great liberation. He was happy. But he had told my mom, tell our daughter, the religious nut, she's right. This is what it's all about. And he was ecstatic. And then when I could see Bob's face, I was thinking about my dad the whole time Bob was talking at that lecture, and it was that same face and I wanted to go and give him a hug afterwards, and I kept on hearing, give him a hug. It's the same thing last time I saw my dad, the same message, go give him a hug, and I did it. And there were so many people around him, and I could see he was tired, but there was this bliss on his face. And that's just the way I remember him the last time I saw him. But thank you, Bob, and thank you for messing with MAGA, because it's going to go down. It gives me faith. It gives me faith in humanity. And there's more. He's another one up there giving us light. So thank you. And thank you all. Condolences. Nana, we love you so much. And we've been looking for you at Menla, so we love you. Please come.
We have time for one more, or unless, Sam, you want to say something?
Well, I've got my hand on the curtain, Michael,
right.
Ready to draw the curtain because we're coming close on time. But if anybody wishes to speak, as Michael says, there's room. Indrek will speak. If I could.
Just a different angle. I know it's too low, but...
Just lift the whole thing up.
Okay. Like this. I came here because of the Krishna Das. I have been hearing his music many years, and it's helping a lot for me on my spiritual journey about meditations, etc. But I'm from Estonia, by the way, and first time in USA. But what I want to share is that what you have here, I mean the people around here, how much you're affecting the world. I don't know how much you really know about that one, or how much you feel about that one, but it's a magic thing. I mean, if you're in here, in the center here, I can imagine that you're doing your thing, your work, but you are impacting so many people, the people who haven't ever met you, and it's so beautiful, and it's giving them a lot. So what I'm inviting you is that to celebrate what you have done together with your great friend who left, and I could imagine that all of you here would be also having this kind of meeting like you have here, but speaking about the still living masters also, that they're speaking about your stories really, that you can be part of this storytelling, because the life is short here. So I really admire what you're doing. I really see how beautiful thing it is here, and it's not fake. It's really true thing what you're doing. So thank you for that one. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's safe to say that everyone here does that in our own ways. And Bob would want to reflect it back, right back at you, and not depend on the guru kind of thing. He always had that. So thank you very much for this. This was really a delight. And Sam, I guess we need to vacate in how much time?
1 minute.
Like everything, right now.
Yeah, suddenly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Michael,
great day,
thank you
everyone.
so much. Thank
And
you
everyone
so much
online.
for being here, near and far. And if I may say, I encourage everybody to go through the gate across the way, and the way is open, everything is free and liberating also. So thank you very much, and thank you